All right, it is 4 o'clock, everyone, and you know what time that is. It's time for Student Affairs Live. I'm the host, Eric Stoller, and welcome to your weekly web show about student affairs topics for student affairs professionals. We've got a great show today. I've got an awesome guest, tons of news, and I'm really excited about it. Today, we have a new tweeter coming at you right now. Our new intern is Rachel Luna Hammer. She's going to be tweeting as Higher Ed Live, doing all kinds of cool things for me during the show, so I'm going to give her a quick shout out. Also, Student Affairs Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. That's right. Follow everything at Higher Ed Live for all the tweets. And if you're on Twitter right now, check out the SA Live hashtag. I've got it blown up extra large today so you can see it. That's right, # SA Live for all the tweets for today's show. All kinds of questions, answers, links, resources. Feel free to check it out. And as always, if you have questions during the show, I will ask them to my guest. Phew, we are loaded up with Red Bull and energy today, folks, I can tell you. Really want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to send out a tweet with that link right now. Couple other announcements for today's show. I want to give a quick shout out to the NCSRMR. That's right, the National Conference on Student Recruitment, Marketing, and Retention by Noel Levitz. It's this July 26th to the 28th. It's in Denver. I'm going to be there, showing up, representing Student Affairs Live, tweeting, shooting some video, probably hosting a tweet up, doing all kinds of neat stuff with that. And if folks are interested in sort of where Student Affairs Live is going to be at, where I'm going to be, or where Seth Odell, the host of Higher Ed Live, is going to be, we created a Google map, and we're going to tweet that out here in a second. But the Google map basically shows you kind of where we're at, what we're up to, what events we're participating at. So please feel free, check out the map, see what we're up to, because we are all over the United States and Canada. I've got an event in Toronto coming up, so lots going on for the Higher Ed Live network. We're traveling, we're tweeting, we're shooting video, interviewing folks, doing all kinds of things. So folks, I always like to start each show with a little something that I call Challenge and Support. Now, Challenge and Support is sort of my weekly web news, weekly higher ed news that I like to share with you. So the first thing I want to share, and it's more of a shout out than necessarily something news related, it's the Student Affairs SA Tech Boston Unconference. It's happening in July. It's hosted by Boston University. It's being put on by Ed Cabellin, Mike Hamilton, and Ken Elmore. And it's kind of the first of its kind for student affairs folks who are interested in technology, interested in gathering, creating sort of a sense of community amongst those who kind of identify as SA techies. And it's going to be awesome. I'm really excited about it, and really it's a free event. You should go, and it's going to be fun. I guarantee it. Next thing I wanted to mention that was sort of in the news today as well as a little earlier in the week was an interesting story. It came from Inside Higher Ed about Catholic University returning to single-sex residence halls, and it's an interesting story because a lot of residence halls have moved on to anybody can live in any wing, any floor. Everyone's sharing restrooms, showers, whatever, you name it. Maybe not showers, that would be a little awkward, but so the president at Catholic University had some interesting things to say when it came to sort of the rationale for why they were returning to single-sex residence halls. Notice I don't use the four-letter word because I don't want to cause a disturbance in the force like we had that one week. One of the quotes, though, from President Garvey really disturbed me, actually, and it was that he thought that, that young women would have a civilizing influence on young men as to sort of the current state of affairs with their residence halls. And I wanted to say, let's talk about gender stereotypes for a minute and where he's coming out with that. So I think that they've got a lot of work to do over at Catholic University when it comes to the words that their president is sharing with the general public and how perhaps his attitudes on gender are influencing policy. So that'll be an interesting conversation, I think, at Catholic University. Another story that came up from diverse issues in higher education was a student in New Jersey was denied some financial aid because her mom is undocumented. The student was born in the United States. She's a citizen of the United States, a legal resident of the United States, and there's an interesting policy that was happening in New Jersey where she was denied aid, and so it makes no sense to me why she would be denied aid at all, because she's a resident of the United States. And so I really I know the ACLU stepped in, and they're sort of working with this student. And so stay tuned for this story, because it's a really interesting conversation around legal status, financial aid, and it's almost tied to this current state of affairs with regards to folks who are undocumented in general in the United States when it comes to higher education. Another story out of NACE, which is an association for folks that do employers and colleges. And it looks like, folks, I want to just jump in here really quickly. I'm getting notes from the web that TweetDeck isn't letting Rachel send out links as Higher Ed Live. So I don't know, Twitter, if you're doing something with TweetDeck right now because you just purchased them, but we'd like you to fix it and get it corrected. So Rachel, if TweetDeck isn't working, maybe you could just use twitter.com, since apparently that's what Twitter wants us to do. Speaking of Twitter, the NACE report that I wanted to share, and Rachel will send that out as at Higher Ed Live here in a second, they were talking about how students are using social media in the job search, and how LinkedIn and Twitter were sort of the primary tools that students were using as opposed to Facebook, which makes a lot of sense. LinkedIn being a great tool for networking, resource sharing, etc., and Twitter maybe for looking for resources, making connections, etc., whereas Facebook obviously is a lot more about people that you know versus people that you don't know. Another story here that comes out of Arkansas, and I think this is really fascinating for folks who are interested in college admissions, financial aid, enrollment management, and just kind of the future of sort of the demographics of our institutions. At the University of Arkansas this year, 1/3 of their first-year students are from outside of the state. And oh, thanks, Jeff. Jeff Jackson just tweeted at me that at Higher Ed Live is sending out links. So Rachel, maybe you could restart TweetDeck and start it up again. Sometimes that helps with refreshing the issue. It looks like right now Jeff Jackson is the only person I can see on my TweetDeck too, so who knows what's going to happen with the SA Live back channel today for the show. But back to the article, I think that it's an interesting concept where you've got sort of state institutions that are made up of a huge amount of students from out of state, and 1/3 of first-year students being from outside the state means you sit in the class, the people right next to you, one of them is out of state. And from out of state. So it's an interesting dynamic in terms of how universities and colleges are trying to increase their revenue streams by going after students from out of state because they pay out of state tuition, but it also changes the demographic of the class and just the overall sort of mission of an institution. Think about a land-grant institution that's all about serving the individuals of that actual state versus bringing in students from out of state. So interesting conversation there. Last but not least, I wanted to mention the NASPA Tech Conference. It's sort of what I'm sort of labeling as part 2 of the Student Affairs Unconference that's happening in July. The NASPA Tech Student Affairs Technology Conference is happening in October. It's going to be in Rhode Island, and this is, I believe, the very first sort of official association-driven Student Affairs Technology event. Now, there have been events on technology that I've participated with NACADA, the Academic Advising Association, but I've never seen anything from NASPA or ACPA that was really specifically targeted for folks who are interested in technology. That's going to be in Newport, Rhode Island. I'm going to be participating as a panelist as well as a session leader, and yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I sort of am framing this as you go to the event in Boston in July, it's kind of part 1, and you go to the NASPA Tech Student Affairs Technology Conference in October, it's kind of part 2 for your learning experience. Now, as you know, and by the way, folks, I have a new camera today, so hopefully I'm coming in sort of crystal clear, but I'm still sort of working out the details of where to look, because it's a lot different than an eyesight for some reason. It's an actual camera, so all I need now is sort of a camera person telling me to quit having all this banter. So folks, every week on SA Live, I like to have a feature that I call the unsolicited shout-out of the week. It's when I sort of give a shout-out to a person, a place, a service, a thing, an event, etc. And this week's unsolicited shout-out of the week, it's really special to me because there's a lot of folks who work really behind the scenes and, I guess, in front of the scenes for this. And it's really the Women in Student Affairs knowledge community for NASPA has their WISA, it's W-I-S-A, drive-in event. Starts this Friday. It's in Columbus, Ohio. It's at Ohio State University, and it's going to be an awesome event. I know that several leaders of NASPA are going to be there. There's just going to be an amazing community of women leaders gathering together to share sort of vision, experience, to support one another, and just engage in a lot of learning and reflection. So I think it's really going to be an awesome event. They started a new blog, I believe, or it's not a new blog, but sort of maybe a regular occurring sort of series of posts that are going to take place that the KC, or the Knowledge Community for Women's Student Affairs, came out with today. So that's really exciting. So yeah, once again, the shout out this week is to Women in Student Affairs, KC, WISA. Awesome stuff, awesome people, and if you're in Columbus, Ohio, or in that area, that part of the country, you should definitely go. It's going to be an awesome event. Speaking of Women in Student Affairs and awesome, I'd love to sort of give you a quick intro to my guest. My guest today is Mamta Accapadi. She is the Dean of Students at Oregon State University. She's wearing orange. She's a great friend, great mentor, and Mamta, welcome to Student Affairs Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I can't. I'm so excited that you're here. It's really exciting to me. It's kind of funny. I had to move all the way to South Carolina to interview someone who's in Corvallis. But you know, you're wearing orange and I'm wearing black. Can't see it right now. I'm actually wearing the old OSU polo. So you know, go Beavs. Go Beavs. You know, last week I had the U of O episode, and this week I have the OSU themed episode. And great. Today we're going to talk about a couple different things. So we're going to talk about your role as the Dean of Students at Oregon State, as well as your upcoming adventure on a boat, or on a vessel, I suppose, for semester at sea, and sort of everything in between. And I know that one of the questions we got through the Twitter sphere earlier was sort of, you know, what's it like being a Dean of Students? And I think that was a great question because it's sort of a great intro question for the show and to sort of introduce folks to you. So I would say, you know, what's a week like for the DOS? Sort of a typical day, typical week.
Well, you know, I have had some chance to kind of reflect on, you know, of course, the initial answer is going to be there isn't really a typical week or a typical day, but I thought about this, and so I actually am going to give you kind of a snapshot of an actual week, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the landscape of the week included, we're working on, I don't know if you're familiar with, but the Office of the U.S. President has an interfaith service challenge, an institutional interfaith service challenge, and so we're putting together an application for that. And so I had a team of writers, you know, that were working on this application. So that was the content of action in 1 week. During that same week, we were meeting with Libyan students because as a result of kind of the political climate of Libya, how do we best support and care for our students from Libya who are here, whose funding streams have been pretty much paused while things are being figured out in Libya. I got to speak to the class of the Golden Jubilee reunion class of 1961. So talking to alums who were celebrating their 50-year reunion. I spent some time with some alums from the class of 1941 here at OSU as well. I'm just, again, really connecting with people who are members of the community. I got to experience our student government inauguration of the new incoming president, vice president of our ASOSU, our student government. As a mom, my daughter is going through transition, so figuring out what school she's going to be going through next. So that was also happening during the week, that particular week. I'm getting her school paperwork in, and other duties as assigned. So, I mean, that's just kind of as you talked about semester at sea a little bit, and so I try to do my semester at sea work in the early morning, so I usually get up at around 5-ish to manage semester at sea things before I come into the office. So that's kind of what that's been like. And then student celebrations and festivals kind of throughout the evenings because it was the end of the school year.
Well, and I would imagine you get invited to a lot of events on campus.
Yeah, I feel lucky to. I mean, I feel like, you know, I think the role of a dean of students is really to be a container of community and to model the spirit of family on campus. And so I see that as a bestowed gift.
Well, and how long have you been at Oregon State?
I just finished 2 years here.
So I guess since you've been at OSU for 2 years now, sort of
Uh-huh.
what are some points of wisdom that you could share, sort of from the first 2 years of being a dean of students at OSU? Because previously, you weren't a dean of students, correct?
Mm-mm. No, I was not. My background's in multicultural affairs, and my journey is a little. I say my journey is different, but I think there is no traditional journey to a dean of students. Some people might argue that there is. I don't. I think that I thought I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and so I'd actually had gone from multicultural affairs to the academic side of the house, doing a postdoc in women's studies, and then had my daughter and thought, okay, am I going to be stay-at-home mom full time, or am I going to go back to work in this capacity to take the next step in my career? And I have to say, for me, words of wisdom. I mean, that was the struggle. That's the struggle, a conversation I have with myself daily. Did I make the right decision to come back to work? Because the negotiation of balance is a daily conversation for
Absolutely.
me.
Yeah, well,
Um,
especially if you're getting up at 5 a.m. to work on things.
Well, and I think that getting up at 5 a.m. means more time with family later on and more presence with students. And so I think if you asked about words of wisdom, I think, we talk a lot about work-life balance. That's kind of phrasing and technology, phrasing that we use,
Mm-hmm.
buzzwords that we use. And I don't know, for me, I've shifted my own personal conversation from seeking work-life balance to seeking joyful experiences,
Absolutely.
because I'm not sure balance is where I want to end. I want to end with joy and making the most out of the limited number of breaths or life moments that I have. And so trying to make sure that everything is, if it's not a joyful moment, it creates a trajectory of a joyful moment. And how do you go about doing that? And that doesn't always work, but I think that if that's the primary intention, that's just a different way of living and leading. And so that's been relatively new for me. And I attribute that, of course, I attribute that to motherhood. And Oregon State University is a great campus where I think we in student affairs definitely strive for that across the board. So it's nice to be part of a collective that believes in that.
Yeah. Well, I'm slightly biased. I would agree with you that it is
Mhm.
it's a fun place to work at. Um, One of the things that, as a dean of students, you deal with are sort of difficult times. Whenever something bad happens to a student, life circumstances occur. Generally speaking, a lot of institutions, the dean of students is the point person for when that happens. Where do you go for sort of professional resilience and just like personal sort of care when this takes on? Because obviously you're dealing with a lot of heavy topics.
Mhm. Well, I think so. One of the reasons that I think that my background in multicultural affairs has really helped me in this role as a dean of students is that in my previous profession or previous professional reality, when you're dealing with racial incidents, does again that really exhausting, difficult stuff. You have to take care of yourself, and I actually did not do a good job of that when I was kind of an earlier professional. So I've been really intentional about that now. And the piece is that when people rely on the dean of students or the dean of students office, I mean, it's a strong network within this office that handles that kind of work. I think it's about remembering that when we're serving people in crisis, that's their crisis. It's not our crisis. So if we're carrying that crisis as if it's ours, we're really overshadowing the fact that that's somebody else's pain. And so I don't get exhausted from other people's crises. I actually find strength and empowerment in dealing with those situations because it's a reminder that people need you and people need you to be in a certain place.
Right.
I also draw strength from different places. So for me, I draw strength from my almost 3-year-old. I have a strong relationship with yoga. And so there's actually a phrase called Sukham Sthiram Asanam. It's from one of my favorite texts. And in Sanskrit, that translates to kind of there is always find stability and joy in whatever seat you're in, right?
Absolutely.
And so,
That's a great quote. I wanted to point out that you mentioned that someone else's crisis isn't your crisis. I think that's an awesome point. I hope that folks pick up on that because all too often it seems like folks in student affairs want to take on someone else's issue and sort of use that as opposed to you have to be the one that provides strength and
mhm,
resources and calm
Hmm. My mother uses a great analogy, and she says, there's a reason, like it's a difference between being a mother and a nurse. So if you're in a hospital room handling somebody, there's a reason that a nurse sometimes is more effective than the mother, because the nurse comes in with a detached level of passion and care. And detached does not mean not passionate. It just means being at a place of distance where you can passionately care for somebody the way they deserve to be cared for, rather than having kind of skewed perspective because you've internalized the other person's experience.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And folks, please feel free to tweet your questions. Mamta and I will definitely discuss them. It's the Essay Live hashtag. One of the questions that came in earlier was from Matt Deeg. And Matt wanted to know, and I thought this was a really good question because you kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, was how does the Dean of Students stay involved with and connected to students on top of managing all the administrative functions that you have to do? And I thought that was a great question because you do so many things administratively. How do you stay connected to students? Because it's in your title.
Hmm. Well, for me, I think some of the things I just incorporated into my lifestyle. So I do have an office. I'm sitting in my office right now, but most people will tell you that I'm never in my office. Because to me, I mean, we are so lucky to have the technology resources that we have, and just any of the resources. There's no reason for me to be bound to this office. So I can easily do my work with my laptop and my cell phone in the Memorial Union, or just on campus, just out on the lawn if I need to. And so I try to be very, very present just in the day in and day out realities. I think ceremonial events for students are really, really important, but I don't want to tokenize students and student relationship in the ceremonial events. I think it's about being in it all the time, right? And so sometimes, like when I first got here, we have START leaders, our orientation advisors for those folks that do new student programs. I took the class with them. So that was a way for me. I blocked it out in my schedule, and I couldn't go all the time, but I attended class with them as a peer. Or I try to find a way to teach in the classroom so I can understand the academic demands, things like that. Now, how do you do that on top of the administrative piece? You do the best you can most of the time. You can't ignore the administrative piece, but I think you can, like for me, it's the administrative piece, the person that I am, the mother, partner, person that I am outside of my professional role, as well as the student piece. And so when I don't see those things in isolation, I'm able to actually find more balance. So actually, one of the things that I do is I try to work literally from home once a month. And I'm not interrupted by, people coming into the office or phone calls or things like that. I can crank out administrative things as I need, but then it frees me to be able to spend time with people in the way that they need at certain times. So I don't abide by an 8 to 5 schedule, but then I also make sure to create spaces for self-care.
Okay. Well, and do you think that's a trend that a lot of sort of senior level administrators are taking on, the sort of the technology enables them to take their administrative needs kind of wherever they're at so that they can be out and about more often?
I hope so. I think, I mean, the optimist spirit in me says yes. Why wouldn't you?
And this show is all about optimism, so keep it coming. Keep it coming.
So I mean, in my experience, again, I have a narrow perspective, but in my experience, I think so. I think that's, we went into this work for the interpersonal connection. That's one of the pieces. I never imagined that I would be a dean of students for this very reason. I didn't want to lose the interaction with the students, and I actually felt. I don't feel like I have. I actually feel like I, oddly enough, have managed to have more interaction on a broader scale.
Well, that's good to know. I think that a lot of people that I talk to in student affairs, especially at the grad student level, will say, mm-hmm. I don't want to move so far ahead in my career mm-hmm. that I can no longer have access to students. Student mm-hmm. contact is extremely important to me. It's a theme that it's prevalent all over because that's what got folks into the career in the first place mm-hmm. was student contact.
Yeah, and so similar to things like weight loss, right? If people are exercising and saying like, oh, I think I want to, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to lose X number of pounds this year, and I'm going to start tomorrow, right? We talk about changing our habits, but we don't incorporate that into our routine. I think it's about owning that we always have. So there should be I always believe I have a choice, even if I don't feel like I have a choice. And I frame things from I'm going to make the choice to make sure that students are a priority, that they feel that connection, that I feel that connection. And I'm also going to make the choice to be administratively strong. So when you determine what choices you're going to make, then you create the infrastructure for those choices to
I hope the good news about
through.
this show is it's archived, and so we get to put that back up, and I get to write down what you just said because that's the one thing I love about hosting the show is my guests say the most amazing things, and I think that was definitely added to the book of amazing things that folks have said. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
So talk to us about trends. What trends do you see in student affairs, higher ed, or even at the level of the dean of students? Things that all the deans of students are thinking about these days.
Well, again, so context, being 2 years into my job, it's definitely been lots of steep learning curve, so I want to own that up front. And I think the pieces that I've been most humbled by and inspired by in this role would be, I think this probably, it may or may not be a surprise, but really how are we building a global consciousness, in terms of how we educate our students. You talked about the out of state, the increase of out-of-state students. There's the trend of the increase of international students and international partnerships. And I think that that becomes really important, but not just from the frame of, increase of enrollment of international students, for example, on our campuses, but what are we doing to encourage people to travel internationally, to experience an international context for themselves? So I think when I was preparing for this interview, I wrote down notes. I said, we need to rethink all of our notions of borders. Rethink the borders of student affairs, rethink the borders of academic affairs, rethink the borders of what we consider learning outcomes, rethink the board. I mean, I don't know if in-state, out-of-state is an effective construct anymore. I mean, if do state schools really prepare students for the state? I mean, are we really in that much of an isolation? We're preparing students for the world. All of us should be preparing students for the world. And so I think that that's a different way of preparation, of not just preparation, but how are we teaching people to imagine constructing the world that they want to live in and serving that world. So those are things that I think about.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it reminds me of the silo effect that occurs in student affairs, in higher ed, academic affairs versus sort of student affairs, and I think that was a great point what you said about state schools serving students within the state, so that with the I guess antiquated idea that they would stay in the state and contribute to the state, whereas folks are fluid, folks are moving around. There's a lot more dynamic aspect to sort of education in general. It's not just sort of in a bubble, and I think that was such a great point, and I think that perhaps the University of Arkansas, maybe they're sort of maybe a little more forward thinking about that. I tend to think it's about enrollment management and about allocation of funds, but you never know.
Well, I mean, and it is about that. I think that when enrollment management conversations are happening, I'm sure that conversation is happening, right? We need a certain number of out-of-state tuition dollars. And what does it look to rethink the entire infrastructure, right? But to rethink an entire infrastructure like that would mean being in true partnership and beyond the borders of one state, beyond the borders of one's nation, to think about, again, we share the same real estate. It's the same planet. Okay, so now what do we do? How are we going to work together?
That's a mammoth undertaking in terms of sort of socio-cultural realignment, and higher ed could definitely lead the way, but it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of movement, because the model as it exists right now that pays a lot of folks get their paycheck from their institution,
right.
and it's dependent on those revenue stream models, and so it's really interesting because the second you start talking about the idea of out-of-state students, in-state students, we're all the same students, it doesn't matter because we're all in the same piece of real estate, this giant floating sphere, then what? And I think that's actually, I'll probably ask you to come on for another show for that one, because I think we can talk about that one for a couple hours easily, and I think that the folks watching right now on Twitter could probably give us a lot of stuff to chew on as well. So speaking of international experiences, you are going on a 111-day leave of absence.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that and sort of the how, the why, the where, everything about it.
So you're so wonderful. I am going to be sailing on the fall 2011 voyage for Semester at Sea, which is it's a not-for-profit kind of study abroad, global study abroad experience affiliated with the University of Virginia. And I'll be in the role of Dean of Students on the ship, so that's kind of fun. Family will be coming with us. And pretty much it's a global engagement experience, but rather than an immersion in one country or one cultural community, we're going to be circumnavigating the globe, and we'll be stopping at 10, 11 different ports around the world while students are in class. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And how many students? You told me how many students are going to be on the ship, but I can't remember now.
Well, I don't have official numbers for this particular voyage, but it ranges anywhere from 600 to 700, 800-ish students on per voyage.
That's
from all over.
Yeah, so they're from all over the U.S. or from all over the world?
There are students predominantly from all over the U.S., but Semester at Sea has some neat programs where students can sail partially, because the global engagement piece and the interpersonal connection piece is a high value. So there might be a student sailing from like South Africa to India, part of the voyage, partial voyages. But they have a strong commitment to having it be more global.
And how does it work? How do you get to do this, where you can just sort of get up and leave your current job for a little while and go on a vessel for a voyage?
Well, first, I have to honor the people that choose to do this and let go of their jobs. So there are people that actually do that if they are not granted a leave of absence. So the ability to have a leave of absence is because I have a super amazing boss that is allowing me to do that because he believes in the global engagement piece as well. But Semester at Sea is something I've been looking at ever since I was in graduate school. So, since the 90s, I was trying to find a way to do Semester at Sea. Actually, picked it as an undergraduate as well. I don't come from a financial background where I could have ever afforded the experience, even with financial aid. And then when I was in graduate school, I couldn't have afforded to leave my jobs to take on this experience. And so, interestingly enough, it was the NASPA conference last year. And I saw the Semester at Sea booth. I have never seen a Semester at Sea booth, and apparently they're always there. But I stopped and talked to somebody, one of their representatives, Julie Hurst. I feel like she definitely deserves a shout out. And I said, I could never do this in my life. And so I need you to convince me and help me explain to people how I can make it possible for them. Since I could never do it, I want to make sure it's possible for somebody else who wants to do it. And she challenged me, and she was like, why wouldn't you be able to do it? And she went through kind of just a great personal exercise with me. And she was like, well, first, why don't you apply and see if you get any of the positions and then determine whether it's possible. You have to sit in the realm of possibility. And so I did.
Before you get into the the deeper level questions, you should figure out if you're going to get in first, probably.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think there's a great question from Melissa Brown. She asked it on Twitter earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of goes into what you're talking about, is what are some key things to know before applying to a Semester at Sea position regarding life for a staff member?
So life for a staff member on the voyage?
Absolutely. I think, some folks, like you alluded to, have decided to, quit their current positions at their institution. Others have, worked around, HR policies, et cetera, to get a leave of absence. But what are some things you have to do in order to prep for this type of thing? Because you've never been a dean of students on a nautical vessel before.
No, I have not. My experience with nautical vessels include a cruise vacation with my mother, so I don't know if that counts as training for this. But so some of the things, and actually the context that I would offer for Semester at Sea would be the context that I offer for any personal life transformation, just kind of the next step in any journey, which is you have to determine what are things that you can live with, what are things that you cannot live with. And then what are things that you can live without, and what are things that you can't live without? And so it's like, imagine that as a matrix of 4 questions. And so for Semester at Sea, there was a point in my career where I could not live without a job when I came back, or I didn't feel like I could. And so the decision for me was then I couldn't apply. But at this point in my life, I was also in the same place. I knew that I would not be able to go unless I had the opportunity to return, so I was able to go. But there's some, for some folks that are open to, well, this is kind of at a transition point in my career where I am looking for other positions anyway. This would give me the opportunity to have the break and then begin with a job search. I think, again, it's just about assessing where you are, what you need, what level of risk you're able and willing to take, and then surrounding yourself with people like Julie did for me, which was nudging what you think is possible. So having somebody kind of challenge you and say, really, like, you need to do this, or you need to be here for this, or, things like that. And she did that for me. And I would surround yourself with people that are willing to imagine possibilities with you.
I think it's helpful that they have worked with administrators, worked with student affairs professionals. They sort of know what we're going to ask. They know that the typical things that come up during a voyage. So I'm sure they can sort of help you out and sort of give you guidance throughout the process. Jeff Jackson wants to know from Twitter, how receptive was the administration when you approached them?
My boss, Larry Roper, is my supervisor. He's the vice provost for student affairs here, and he was very encouraging and very receptive. In fact, I shared with him when I applied, so after NASPA, I shared with him that this is something that I was really interested in. And I didn't think that it was going to happen. And then several months later, I was like, that semester at sea thing that I didn't think was going to happen? Well,
like,
surprise!
It's a series of fittings. Like, you get the life jacket and, all these sort of nautical stereotypes are coming into play here,
Well, I think the other thing, I was really concerned because, again, I just told you, I finished my second year here. So I had the anxiety of, wow, I would be leaving right at the beginning of my third year. And what does that say? What message does that send to people on this campus about my commitment to being here at OSU? And oddly enough, for me, it actually, I know that I'm going to be here unless I'm terrible and need to be invited to leave. But that's not
going to happen.
But the stability element, to me, going on this voyage right now is a sign. I mean, I see Corvallis, Oregon as my home. And so I am going to be, I hope that I can live as I would in my home, which is taking adventures like this and rethinking how we do things. I think Semester C is going to, it has been and will be a transformative experience, I think, for how I view how we serve students and how we transform students' lives here. So I think the institution also benefits, and I have a feeling that Larry probably sees that and knows that.
Well, in full disclosure, Larry Roper is the reason why I went to graduate school at Oregon State University in many ways, and so he actually funded most of my assistantship for graduate school. So I think that I think the world of Larry, and it's not a surprise to me that he was able to sort of say, "Go for it. This is a great experience. You're going to bring a lot back to the campus from this." Stephen Wong asked a question from Twitter. He says, and this is a question from a Semester at Sea alum, so someone actually was actually, I guess the acronym, I love it. It's SAS. So
yeah,
it's a SAS alum. Is what do you hope to accomplish in your time with Semester at Sea? What are some of your goals? What do you hope to do?
Well, I'm really lucky that I'm, Semester at Sea, as a dean of students, you get to hire your kind of the living learning coordinator team. And so I feel the most amazing team of colleagues that I will have the chance to work with. And together we will serve this Fall 11 voyage in amazing ways. We've been having regular phone calls. And so some of the things that I've talked about in terms of our goal for at least overarching learning goal for the students on the voyage, we are planning hopefully to have a social justice immersion on the voyage so students can make meaning of the experiences that they're having while they're having them, and also figuring out how that plays into their own personal trajectory for their sense of purpose, and how, what is our identity as Americans with privilege, having those kinds of really meaningful conversations on the voyage. I hope that happens. I hope, for me, a really powerful over the past couple of years has been, you referenced NACE, the professional organization. So I think about career development quite a bit, and I think students aren't coming to college now just asking, what's my job going to be? They're asking the question, who am I going to be on this earth? What is my purpose of my existence? And job fits into that. And so on the voyage, really encouraging students to have that introspection about, who do you want to be? How are you going to pay rent to the planet? What does that look like for you? And how is this experience facilitating?
Well, I think what you're talking about epitomizes the idea of student affairs practitioners engaging in the space of being educators, and it's all about learning and education. I haven't heard you say anything about dealing with things like student conduct issues or crisis management, or sort of the sort of more prescriptive aspects, or the logistical aspects of being a dean. Have you gotten into that very much with your conversations with the Semester at Sea folks?
Yes, we have. And so for me, so in my role, to me, that's part of the fabric. And so I haven't named it because I think that's like oxygen, right? You don't necessarily, it's always there, or you think it's always there. Take for granted that it's always there. To me, student conduct, risk management, those are also very important pieces of learning and of life. And so our assistant dean of students on the voyage is going to be the primary conduct officer. Semester C has an amazing risk management framework, probably one of the most amazing frameworks that I've seen, and already I've benefited professionally from that, because having gone through kind of the training for the senior administrative team, it's nice to see just how thorough. Sexual assault on campus, very complicated and, traumatic, painful, as you can imagine, in terms of how it affects the campus community. What happens if it's a sexual assault, on a ship in another country? How are things complicated? So I think really thinking about those things. And again, I think that we in student affairs are trained to know how to handle the multifaceted pieces. For me, it's about being grounded and not freaking out. So it's again about being steady in your seat. That Sukhum's theorem, asanam piece. How do you find joy and stability in whatever it is that you're doing, no matter how chaotic it feels? And so, because the team is qualified to handle those things, I'm not even worried about that. But it's how do you do that in your best self way?
Now you get to pick your team, and is it public in terms of who they are? Can you name names? Can you share sort of the staff that you've collected? It's like the A team, right? You got to pick people and bring them in from all over. Sort of, I guess, who's coming along with you? What institutions are represented?
So they're on the Semester at Sea website. I'm so afraid I'm going to forget people. Let me see. I'm going to start with the assistant dean of students. Her name is Catherine Murray, and she just finished a doctoral program at Stanford, and has, a very rich kind of history. Then we have different living learning coordinators. Living learning coordinator for student recreation, student activities is Dave Eng. Cher Janae Lenzies are LLC for diversity and intercultural competence. Joy Tailuan No is our LLC for leadership. We have Thais Bouchereau, who is LLC for academic success. I'm so drawing a blank there. Oh, Catherine Weedle is our LLC for health promotions. I'm trying to think.
They're coming from, you
all
named
over.
Some names of institutions all across the country, I'm imagining.
Yeah, they're all over. Yeah, all over. Okay. We have, California, Texas, New York, UPenn. Yeah.
Okay. Any Iowa representation? I always like it when the folks from the landlocked states get to go abroad. It's always fun.
I Midwest, not. Okay. I don't know. Iowa.
Fair enough. Oh, and it looks like Rachel has tweeted out the information about the voyage, so that it's going to have the names of folks in terms of deans, faculty, and staff. So if folks are paying attention to the Essay Live hashtag, they can check out that.
Yeah, 3 more people: Remy Nagata, Christy Burke, and Tracy Dowling. And there we have it. That's the team.
Okay, that's quite the name then. The names you've got there. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you all meet ahead of time then, in port, or do you Skype conference call each other and start going over things? How do you develop a sort of a community within the staff before you all get together?
We've had 3 conference calls, and again, the benefit of being on the West Coast is that I can have those calls really early in the morning, and so the West Coast folks have to get up early with me, but. We have about an hour-and-a-half conference call to talk about different elements, from community to programmatic types of things to, how are we gonna support and make sure that the our academic colleagues feel a strong connection to us, and how are we gonna, just general conversations like that, as well as things like, let's research the political climate in China, or High Holy Days. that might be happening when we arrive in Ghana, things like that. Just I want people to be intentionally aware of it's not just the weather in this country is this temperature. What's the weather when we arrive?
Yeah.
Or
Take
what
your,
are
it's not just take your malaria pills.
right?
Yeah.
It's yeah, or it's or what if there are high holy days that coincide with countries that happen to have those religious traditions present? How do we maximize on that learning? I'm really silly about this as an example, but one of the ports that we'll be in is Mauritius. And Mauritius, and I'm a Bollywood fan, right? And Mauritius is a top geographic location for the filming of Bollywood movies and songs. And
Nice.
so what would it look like to have a flash mob before we get to Mauritius, or from Mauritius to India? There's a connection there. There's a connection between Mauritius and India. There's a history connection. It's not just Bollywood. It's food, culture, religion, traditions. But how do you create spaces for people to engage or connect with that? So,
And I did want to mention that the music I played for the intro of the show was the music that was played during the Oregon State flash mob. You were a participant in. You actually danced in the flash mob. And I must apologize, though. I didn't realize that that music is connected to a particular actor, and it's not your favorite actor in the Bollywood scene.
It's all good.
I'll try to give you someone else for the close. But so you mentioned social justice. Obviously, social justice is sort of a theme that's been prevalent in this conversation, and it's been woven throughout. What does it mean to you to be a dean of students, given the history of the role?
Well, I think that there's always, so when I think about me being a dean of students, I'll actually, for me to share this story is, I'll share the first time that I really felt like it felt real to me that I was a dean of students. And it was, I arrived at OSU in the spring, and it was the first time that I was welcoming new students at orientation, kind of the traditional welcome to your campus speech that a dean of students does at orientation. And at that moment, before I got on stage, I had a flashback to when I was an orientation advisor, and my dean of students was doing that very same talk. And at that moment, I realized that student affairs is what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, and I wanted to influence people the way that she was able to. I wanted to mentor people the way that she had done. And as a woman, she paved the way for not just women, but she paved the way for many students, and she made it possible for women to believe that we could be successful. So I credit and I'm grateful to her for that. So then when you look at, the history of the role of dean of students and kind of any management position, really, it starts off with men, white men usually, and then I would argue perhaps, there's a trajectory then white women. So then what does that look like? If we're, and that's just from a race, gender lens. Of course, there are many identities. So when you think of me as somebody who is not Christian, who is a person of color, a woman, mother of a toddler, those things are really significant. I always think about there are people that are watching me that I might not know, that might be rethinking whether this position is possible for them. The second year, in the beginning of my second year, I had several graduate students tell me I would have never thought to be a dean of students because I just couldn't have managed the motherhood piece. Like I want to have a real life, and you make it seem possible to have a real life. And I just like to be really transparent that I don't have things together all the time, and so that I will do, what I can when I can. And I think that, so when you bring back the social justice lens piece of that, I think that we have to just throw away the idea of a box. And so I think because we have this idea of a box, you have to be everywhere all the time, you have to do this, you have to do this, that automatically excludes certain people based on their cultural norms or values, right? So that's, to me, the social justice lens. It isn't necessarily picking out identities and saying, oh, let's recruit identities. Let's create a system where multiple people of multiple life experiences could experience success in this role. And that's, I think, what I try to do. And I try to create that space for others as well.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I could just listen to you talk and share that story and continue pretty much for the rest of the day. So again, folks, if you have questions for Mamta, please feel free to tweet them out using the SA Live hashtag. Jeff Jackson just realized that you're a fellow Longhorn.
Woohoo!
So apparently, hook 'em.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's well, and you're wearing more of a Texas orange today than you really are. It's not really Halloween-y enough or pumpkin-y enough for OSU. We got to work on that.
I've been told that any orange goes here. I was told that. I actually to not represent only Longhorn orange, I actually packed away all of my burnt orange when I got here, and then I was told any orange goes, and I was like, okay, I didn't know that.
Any orange goes. Well, it seems like I only have a few orange items remaining. I couldn't dress up like the road crew all the time. Well, Mamta, thank you for coming on the show. I have one more question for you before we sort of wrap up today's episode. And it's a really hard one. It's really probably the most difficult question I have for any guest. What are your top 5 favorite websites and or books?
So from an education point of view, actually, my one of my favorite websites is colorlines.org. Again, the multicultural affairs person in me, when I want to challenge my thinking as it relates to kind of race, racialized experience, intersection of identity, social justice pieces, that's really a place that I go to challenge my own thinking, to fuel my own knowledge. AngryAsianMan.com is another one of my favorite websites. That place feels like home to me.
That's the old school social justice blogging community right there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think, pioneer and leader in terms of really promoting awareness of API, Asian Pacific Islander, Desi American issues on a national scale. And then for me, where I am right now in life, I have more favorite books. So one of a book that really is significant for me is The Alchemist. I don't know if you're familiar with The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I could be mispronouncing his name. But again, to me, it's how are we imagining our best selves? So that book, there's San Manuel Bueno Martir is a book by an existential author, Miguel de Unamuno, and it's an amazing novella, I guess it would be called. It's a short novel that really makes you think about your purpose and how you serve and just aligning of self. And I read that book once a year. It's one of those books that grounds me. I love poetry in general. I love really, really passionate poetry. So anything by Sufi poets, I think about like Hafiz or Rumi, just Sufi poets that really kind of really make you think about what real love, real passion looks and feels like. Because I think that if you can embrace passion and love, that really transforms the way you do everything else in your life. And I spent a good chunk of my life not embracing that. And so where I am right now, I think it really liberates me to be passionate all the time.
Well, you are definitely living your best self, and I think you've definitely embraced being a real, authentic person. And I hope that you bring that book with you, the one you read once a year, The Alchemist. You hope you take it on the boat with you, because otherwise you won't have it with you. Those are some great books and some great resources. I can't wait to actually check them out. I know that Rachel's been tweeting them out, so I'm going to have to go back and take a look at all of them. And I know that, you're looking at all these sites, you're reading all these different things, but you're also producing content. I know that the new WISA blog post today alluded to that you're going to write something for the blog, right? What are you going to write about?
I haven't decided. There's so many things. Right now, the most salient identity for me is mother. That's the one I feel most strongly. And so navigating how motherhood and dean of students for me happened at the same time. So I don't know how to do this job without the context of motherhood. So I might write about that. I also might write about, I had a chance to reflect on Indian traditions and how we have lots of traditions associated with our hair, but they're rites of passage, right? So when a Hindu child is born, you shave their head. And I'm in a bicultural family, and so Saya comes from multiple religious traditions, and so I took different decisions for her than I made for myself, but in relationship to hair. And so I thought about how could I use the allegory of hair and in my life to embrace culture, to challenge culture, negotiate identity and self. So I'm kind of torn between those two pieces. If groups have a preference of what they want to hear about, they can tweet it out, and I'll follow it and take that guidance.
Okay, so you're giving a little shout out. If folks watching the show want to provide some blog ideas for Mamta, feel free to tweet them out there. Make sure you hashtag them Essay Live. We'll make sure that Mamta gets those suggestions. Thank you for being on the show. You leave. When do you leave for the voyage?
We as staff, we will be. We board the ship on August 20th in Boston. So the students will board in Montreal a week later, but
okay.
we will leave from Boston.
Well, I hope you're going to blog some of this
yes.
experience.
Yeah, we will be blogging.
Okay, and do you have a link for that yet?
Have it so we were trying to decide if we're going to do it from as a family versus me separately, and so as soon as we come to a resolution okay. around how we do that, then we'll have.
Yeah, definitely tweet that out because folks will love to read it and have an amazing experience, a great trip, and I can't wait to read the blog posts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is so wonderful, and I appreciate how you're allowing us to come together and learn from each other.
Thanks for coming on the show, Mamta. Well, folks, as you can tell, Mamta Accapadi is just a wealth of information, wisdom, and we'll have to have her back on the show again because just the conversation around sort of the changing dynamics of education and borders and sort of the socio-cultural context, that part of our conversation could have gone on for days. And so I can't wait to have her back on. Maybe we'll get her back on when she comes back from her voyage, from her semester at sea experience. I think that would be really amazing to sort of share what she learned from 111 days at sea. So, folks, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to send out a tweet with that link right now. And folks, really excited for next week's show. I want to share this with you. This is the first time anybody's really heard about this, but next week's show, my guest is going to be Gwen Dungy, the Executive Director of NASPA. So on June 22nd, Gwen's going to come on the air with me. She's going to be my guest for Student Affairs Live, and we're going to talk about the future of student affairs. Where are we going as a profession? We might talk a little bit about consolidation, but not too much because we really want to talk about the future and sort of where things are going with higher ed. Gwen is really plugged into things that are happening at the national level, at the international level, and as Executive Director of NASPA, she knows a lot about student affairs. So folks, please tune in next week. We're going to have an awesome show with Gwen Dungy from NASPA. And folks, as always, everything you watched today can be found at higheredlive.com. That's highered